Known as Canada's ocean playground, it goes without saying that Nova Scotia's heritage, culture, and economy has had a long historical influence from its proximity to the ocean. Fisheries represent a major traditional livelihood source, particularly in rural coastal areas where it still holds its position as a vital economic driver. Across the province, the sector holds a significant position as a substantial contributor to our local economy and local identity. As locals of the HRM area, Carley and I grew up near the ocean and both share a close sense of connection with it. As the seas are facing increasing pressures from a number of sources, we wanted to explore the management of fisheries and aquaculture to better understand the recent updates to the Fisheries Act, which strives to provide better protections for fish and fish habitat, so events such as the Newfoundland cod collapse can hopefully be avoided in the future, while fisheries-related livelihoods remain reliable for the communities dependent on them. As set by Section 91 of the Constitution Act of 1867, legislative authority over sea coast and inland fisheries falls to the federal government. First enacted just following the Constitution in 1868, the Canadian Fisheries Act has been amended throughout the years and was very recently modernized to reflect current trends in the industry and of fish population assessments. On June 21, 2019, the new amended version of the Act received royal assent and became law. Canada has the world's longest coastline, and countless rivers, lakes, and streams. In recognition of this, and the interaction between Canada's growing population, their demand for seafood products, and impact of the fishing industry on marine environments, the Federal Fisheries Act emphasizes ecosystem-based management and the precautionary approach, and seeks to provide framework for the proper management and control of fisheries through balancing conservation of fish and their habitat and maximizing economic benefit to people involved in the industry while strengthening Indigenous role in project reviews and contributing to enhanced monitoring and policy development. With high levels of natural variability involved in marine planning and management, local contexts must be considered in management plans. The Fisheries Act contains a number of consolidated regional management units. These regional units are used since environmental and cultural contexts and considerations such as fishing intensity, local species at risk, species targeted, marine traffic, and marine mammal migratory paths vary greatly across Canada's coastal and offshore waters, and so must be managed accordingly. Fishing in each region is regulated through Integrated Fisheries Management Plans, IFMPs, which incorporate intersectoral, scientific, and traditional knowledge to better understand local contexts and prioritize actions according to best practice for harvest of each species to meet economic and conservation goals within the industry. These IMFPs are annually reviewed and have advisory committees who meet regularly to discuss trends and propose amendments to each respective IMFP if necessary. The management of fisheries in Nova Scotia is shared between two distinct DFO regions, the Maritimes region, headquartered at the BIO in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, and the Gulf region, which is headquartered in Moncton, New Brunswick. While marine activities are federally regulated through the DFO, responsibility falls to the regional units to allocate fishing licenses, to determine where harvesting can occur, determine appropriate catch limits per person or vessel in accordance with federally regulated quotas, and in regard to post-harvest processing. Still, overarching management authority rests with the DFO and ultimately with the Minister of the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, who reserves the right to restrict, suspend, or terminate a license, determine the maximum amount of fish to be harvested by all resource users, to impose gear restrictions, and implement closed areas or seasons should it be deemed necessary. These management tools are known as input and output controls. Input controls can be used to manage the intensity and capacity of fishing effort. Types of management controls in this category include restrictions on vessel numbers and size, gear restrictions, and in some cases limits on the amount of fuel usage per vessel as a means of limiting time spent fishing. Output controls are used to focus on directly managing the amount of fish to be landed. Total allowable catch is frequently used as an output control in commercial fisheries, and bag limits used in recreational fisheries. Although split into separate regions, fish resources do not respect anthropogenically imposed spatial boundaries, and so multiple jurisdictions must collaborate to effectively and sustainably manage these stocks. So, international relationships and agreements are necessary to regulate global fishery activity. Canada is a member of several bilateral and multinational agreements for this reason. Locally, the DFO Maritime region and the United States share rights to fish in the Gulf of Maine and on Georges Bank. The two countries work collaboratively in most areas of mutual concern, including transboundary fish stocks and respective species at risk. Due to such an array of users with their own respective interests, the DFO adopts an integrated approach in order to incorporate the diverse interests of fishers, conservationists, researchers, local communities and indigenous groups, marine-based industry, and any other sector, user group, or party with a legitimate interest in the management of our oceans. Often, the interests of these groups can be competing, so consultation is heavily emphasized throughout the 2019 iteration of the Fishery Act as a means of reducing conflict and educating stakeholders on why and how necessary trade-offs are made in the interest of responsible resource use and governance for sustainability for generations to come. The Fisheries and Oceans Canada Conservation and Protection Program is tasked with the enforcement of provisions under the Modernized Fisheries Act. Over 600 fisheries officers across Canada work with the public, harvesters, Indigenous communities, and industry to ensure changes are understood. One of the primary roles of a fisheries officer is to promote and educate harvesters and the public on changes to regulations so they can voluntarily take action to comply with them. Under Section 49 of the Fisheries Act, fishery officers have the authority to issue warrants, fines, make arrests, and search or seize vessels or property if they have reason to believe an offence or plans to commit an offence have occurred. They will usually issue a warning first, though, depending on the severity of the offence. Nova Scotia Environment is responsible for ensuring compliance with the Fisheries and Coastal Resources Act, Fish Harvesters Organisation Support Act, and the Health Protection Act as it applies to fish vendors and retailers. Marine resources, including fish and shellfish, can often be viewed as a common property commodity, which can then lead to competition or a race to fish between fleets. This tragedy of the commons can pose some major management and sustainability challenges. With environmental and economic sustainability of the fishing sector as a central guiding principle of the Fisheries Act, measures to maintain important fish stocks, plans to rebuild major stocks, restore degraded habitats, and provide special attention to the protection of species identified under the Species at Risk Act, the Minister of the DFO has ultimate authority to implement measures intended to protect fish and their habitat, keeping stocks within safe levels necessary to promote sustainability of the population in question. The fishing industry is complex and difficult to administer, made up as it is of many different and often conflicting interest and user groups. Of course, with changing climate conditions and intense human pressures, uncertainty is inherent in fishery science and management. Though not without its own suite of concerns, when carefully managed, aquaculture as opposed to marine capture fisheries has the potential to reduce some major fisheries management challenges, such as reducing pressures on oceanic ecosystems, reducing bycatch of non-target species, and potentially contributing to reduced methylmercury content within large fish species, since their food source can be controlled to reduce bioaccumulation in their systems.
Global demand for seafood is rising at twice the rate of population growth. However, with international wild capture fishery production static since the 1980s, there is a clear need for alternative seafood harvesting methods. As the industry grows, it is important that the management and regulatory framework evolves to ensure that economic prosperity does not cause undue environmental degradation. In 2018, aquaculture contributed $88.6 million to the provincial economy and supported over 500 jobs in rural and coastal communities. The climatic and oceanographic conditions in the province vary greatly by coastal region, resulting in a very diverse set of aquaculture operations. Nova Scotia is home to 270 marine aquaculture sites and 20 land-based fish facilities, farming fresh and saltwater species of finfish, shellfish, and marine plants. There are two main methods of fish farming: open ocean farming and closed containment recirculation systems. There are significant differences in the management between the two types of aquaculture systems. Marine open pen farms that allow the flow of water and nutrients in and out of the fish pen pose significantly more environmental risk as they allow the transfer of food, waste, and disease to the wild fish stocks in the area. It is highly debated whether these operations are sustainable. In a 2012 study, it was reported that the establishment of an aquaculture operation caused fish to avoid the area, and the chemicals used to control sea lice caused large-scale lobster, crab, and shrimp kills. The environmental risks of closed containment systems are significantly easier to manage as they do not interact or impact wild species or the natural environment. However, these systems are in the early stages of development in Nova Scotia. The management of the aquaculture industry is a shared responsibility between the federal and provincial governments. Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada operates under the Fisheries Act to ensure aquaculture is managed sustainably across the country. The aquaculture activities regulations were created under Section 35 of the Act. They address protocol for treating fish disease and parasites, environmental monitoring, transporting marine organisms, and for contaminated fisheries in partnership with Environment Canada and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. All other regulations are the responsibility of the Nova Scotia Department of Fisheries and Aquaculture under the Fisheries and Coastal Resources Act. The Act gives authority to the Department to develop and enforce regulations regarding seed plant harvesting, training and development, and licensing of buyers and processors. In Nova Scotia, the province is also responsible for issuing leases, which entitle the operator to use the seabed for cultivation, and licenses which allow the operator to put fish or shellfish in the location. The Nova Scotia Aquaculture Strategy, published in 2014, focuses on creating sustainable wealth in rural and coastal Nova Scotia while committing to a high standard of sustainable development and environmental respect. The goals of this strategy include practicing responsible farming, implementing regulatory safeguards, creating jobs, and encouraging public engagement to improve the transparency and functionality of the aquaculture industry. The strategy also seeks to build public confidence through engagement opportunities and the continuous review and improvement of regulations as the industry evolves. DFO is currently in the process of a public consultation to inform an Aquaculture Act, projected to be finished as early as 2022. This act would be extremely valuable in establishing aquaculture as a distinct industry and developing more specific environmental protection and economic development regulations. Currently, it is not required that environmental impact assessments are completed for all aquaculture operations. Mandatory EIAs would allow government and industry to proactively address and mitigate potential environmental problems. This would also ensure adequate site selection, assess the impact on native species, and consider cumulative effects. This would also legislate the need for community involvement and compliance monitoring. When executed responsibly, the provincial government believes that aquaculture can help to replenish wild fish stocks, restore benthic habitat, and help to rebuild populations of endangered species. However, proper regulation is key in ensuring that aquaculture operations do not negatively impact the natural environment or establish local fisheries. By developing a new Aquaculture Act and advancing existing technologies, the Nova Scotia government believes that aquaculture can coexist with healthy communities, thriving fisheries, and a clean environment.
Though the management of both fisheries and aquaculture must be adaptive in order to respond to their respective set of challenges, the Fisheries Act, as administered by the DFO, sets framework to prioritize sustainability regarding the cultural and heritage values of fishing communities and the long-term well-being of fish and their habitat, so each can be prosperous and productive well into the future.